The clinking of cheap stainless steel forks against chipped ceramic plates always carried a heavy, exhausting rhythm inside my parents' suburban dining room. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of stale cigarette smoke, damp upholstery, and the unyielding, invisible weight of a family dynamic that had spent decades hollowing out my soul. I stood at the threshold of the kitchen, my arms aching as I held a heavy, steaming glass casserole dish filled with a rich hidden recipe lasagna that had taken me 4 hours to prepare after my final weekend shift. At the center of the long table sat my 7-year-old niece, Maisie, her fingers covered in grease as she pointed a half-eaten chicken wing directly at my face. "You can't sit here, Aunt Hazel," Maisie announced, her high-pitched voice carrying a cruel, calculated venom that no 7-year-old child should ever naturally possess. "Mommy said this side of the table is only for the people who actually matter in this family, and you're just a boring corporate nobody who lives in a tiny apartment." The room fell into a sudden, freezing silence for less than a second before the walls violently rattled with an explosion of loud, mocking laughter from the rest of the adults. My younger sister, Vanessa, slapped her open palm against the wood, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated amusement as she wiped a mock tear from her eye. "Oh my God, the kids really do repeat every single thing they hear around the house," Vanessa shrieked, leaning back in her chair to look at our mother. "Don't look so sensitive, Hazel. It's just a joke from a child, but honestly, she isn't entirely wrong about your elitist attitude." My mother, Maria, let out a sharp, nervous giggle, dismissively waving her hand as she reached for the premium bottle of wine that my money had purchased earlier that afternoon. "Your sister is right, Hazel. Stop standing there looking like a tragic victim over a silly comment," my mother chimed in, her tone dripping with a cold, passive-aggressive entitlement. "Just put the dish down on the counter and fetch the extra napkins from the pantry while you're up. We've been waiting for the main course for over 20 minutes. My father sat at the head of the table, his eyes fixed firmly on the television screen in the corner, completely ignoring the blatant humiliation of his eldest daughter as he cracked open another expensive craft beer. I stood entirely still in the dim light of the doorway, the heavy glass dish burning into the palms of my bare hands, though the physical heat was nothing compared to the absolute, icy clarity that suddenly settled deep into my bones. I looked at the beautiful, shiny lavender bicycle resting against the hallway wall just behind Maisie's chair, a luxury, high-end mountain bike that I had spent $600 to purchase for her birthday just 3 days prior. I looked at the premium organic groceries filling the plates, the expensive silk blouse Vanessa was wearing, and the light fixtures glowing overhead, every single luxury funded entirely by the silent, exhausting sacrifice of my life. In that single, agonizing second, the final fragile threads of familial guilt and conditioned compliance broke completely away from my soul, leaving behind a dangerous, razor-sharp piece. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, and I didn't give them the satisfaction of a dramatic, emotional scene that would allow them to paint me as an unstable, jealous sibling. With a smooth, calculated movement, I opened my fingers and let the heavy ceramic casserole dish slide carelessly from my hands. The dish hit the linoleum floor with a wet, devastating crash, sending layers of hot pasta, rich meat sauce, and sharp shards of shattered glass exploding across the kitchen tiles and directly onto my mother's expensive rug. The laughter in the dining room died an instant, suffocating death as my family gasped in absolute horror, their faces turning a grotesque shade of pale ash as they stared at the ruin on the floor. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket, my fingers entirely steady as I typed a single, unyielding sentence into a direct message to my father's personal number. "Figure it out," the text read, the words flashing like a cold legal notice in the quiet of the room. I turned around without saying another single word, walked out of the front door into the freezing night air, and drove away from their parasitic household forever. To understand the sheer magnitude of the financial destruction that single-dropped dish was about to unleash, you have to understand the deep, systemic resentment I had buried over 6 long years. I was a senior international logistics coordinator for a global maritime supply chain conglomerate, a high-stakes corporate position that required me to manage complex shipping matrix networks and customs clearances. My life was a disciplined, exhausting blur of 60-hour workweeks, midnight system architecture crises, and high-pressure cargo deadlines that left my mind perpetually running on adrenaline and bitter black coffee. My face bore the permanent, heavy shadows of chronic sleep deprivation, and I lived in a minimalist, drafty apartment near the rail yards, sacrificing my own youth to build a fortress of financial security. But while I was surviving on instant noodles and working until my eyes burned from the harsh blue glare of my dual monitors, my family was treating my hard-earned income as an infinite, communal pool. 6 years prior, when my father's independent contracting business collapsed due to signature laziness and absolute lack of market discipline, they had gathered around my kitchen table in tears. They looked at me with practiced, watery desperation and told me that if I didn't step in as the primary financial anchor, they would face an immediate eviction and public humiliation. Because I loved them, and because I was terrified of being labeled as the selfish, ungrateful daughter, I quietly signed my name as the primary guarantor for their suburban rental property. Every single month, like clockwork, a massive $1,500 chunk of my salary was automatically wired to cover their rent, followed by hundreds more for their utilities, their medical copays, and their basic survival. Vanessa used my cash reserves as her personal safety net, routinely siphoning money for her high-end lifestyle while her husband, Gregory, was away for months at a time working as an international traveling superintendent. They spent 6 years enjoying a comfortably parasitic existence off the back of my clean credit profile, completely insulating themselves from the harsh realities of the modern economy. Yet, because my work didn't involve loud bravado or superficial high society status, they openly mocked my academic discipline, branding me as a boring, tight-fisted nerd who lacked their natural charm. They had spent a lifetime training me to accept their psychological warfare, fully confident that my fear of family conflict would make me their permanent, invisible financial doormat. The moment I returned to my apartment that Sunday night, the icy clarity in my mind hardened into an airtight, clinical corporate counterstrike. I sat down at my desk, opened my secure personal banking portals, and systematically began the high-stakes process of total financial decoupling. I canceled the automated monthly rent transfers to their landlord, terminated the secondary credit cards I had foolishly granted my mother for emergency groceries, and blocked their access to my utility profiles. I drafted a formal, certified legal notice to their property management firm, explicitly stating that I was withdrawing my signature as the primary financial guarantor for their lease effective immediately. I closed the valve on the bottomless pipeline of capital that had kept their artificially funded reality afloat for over half a decade, leaving their household to face the unyielding gravity of their own debts. By Tuesday morning, the internal panic inside my parents' home erupted into an absolute, chaotic explosion as the automated payment cancellations hit their systems. My phone began to buzz continuously like an emergency siren, displaying dozens of blocked notifications, frantic voicemails, and violent text messages from my mother and sister. When they realized that their desperate phone calls were bouncing off an unbreakable wall of absolute radio silence, Vanessa's narcissistic rage morphed into a dangerous, calculated corporate smear campaign. She utilized her massive local social media groups and Facebook networks to launch a coordinated psychological assault designed to completely destroy my professional and personal reputation. She posted a series of highly produced, tearful videos standing in my parents' living room, her voice trembling with a weaponized, fake grief that instantly captured the sympathy of the community. My older sister Hazel has completely lost her mind and abandoned her own family out of pure corporate elitism and malice, Vanessa sobbed into the camera lens. She has secretly frozen our elderly mother's medical funding, canceled our housing accounts behind our backs, and is actively trying to force a 7-year-old child onto the streets in the dead of winter. She lives in her fancy corporate tech world and treats her own bloodline like garbage because we encountered a temporary financial setback. Please share this video to expose the true, cold-hearted monster hiding behind her professional credentials. The toxic post went viral within the regional community inside less than 24 hours, accumulating hundreds of shares and a massive wave of unyielding backlash from old family acquaintances. Hateful, aggressive messages began flooding my secondary public business portfolios, with faceless strangers calling me an ungrateful corporate parasite who deserved to be blacklisted from the city. My parents sat back in their suburban home, watching the digital execution unfold with a smug, self-satisfied pride, fully confident that the public humiliation would force me to crawl back on my knees to restore the funding lines. They completely underestimated the absolute, terrifying reach of data, and they completely forgot that a master logistics coordinator never steps onto a battlefield without mapping the entire asset trail. The magnificent, devastating plot twist of the entire conflict arrived on a Thursday evening from the most unexpected corner of our broken family structure. Vanessa's traveling husband, Gregory, had unexpectedly returned to the country early after completing an intense maritime engineering contract in the North Sea. He walked into the suburban house to find his wife celebrating her viral social media victory over a glass of expensive champagne, completely oblivious to the digital footprint she had left behind her. Gregory was a man of immense integrity, a quiet, hard-working professional who had spent years silently observing the grotesque, parasitic greed of his wife and her lazy parents with an intense disgust. He had always maintained a deep, silent respect for my relentless discipline, knowing that my funds were the only thing preventing his own household from collapsing during his long deployments away from home. When he discovered the disgusting smear campaign Vanessa had launched against my life, a white-hot fury overrode his patience, prompting him to initiate an explosive corporate counterstrike. Gregory contacted my personal attorney privately that night, handing over a massive, encrypted secure drive containing the historical data cache of the family's private communications. For 3 continuous years, while I was excluded from the family circles, my mother, father, and Vanessa had operated a secondary, highly confidential group chat entirely dedicated to tracking their exploitation of my finances. The unedited digital transcripts and audio files contained within that drive were an exercise in pure, unadulterated human depravity. Look at how easily the doormat turned over the cash for the birthday bike. One of Vanessa's text messages read, the words time-stamped weeks prior. We just have to tell her mom is skipping her heart medication, and she'll wire whatever we want without checking the bills. Make sure you keep her feeling isolated, Maria's voice replied in a leaked audio note. If Hazel thinks she's actually a valued member of this family, she'll start demanding a seat at the table and checking where the rent money is actually going. The logs explicitly documented how they had used my siphon capitals to fund luxury resort vacations, designer clothing lines, and secret personal investment accounts registered entirely under Vanessa's name. Gregory didn't just share the files with me. He coordinated with my legal team to execute a spectacular, public karma reveal that would completely obliterate their reality in front of the entire community. On Friday afternoon, at the exact peak of Vanessa's viral video metrics, Gregory logged into the primary administration servers of her social media pages. He systematically uploaded the complete, certified forensic paper trail and the raw, unedited family chat logs directly into the pinned comment section of every single viral post. He attached the banking logs showing my $1,500 monthly transfers side by side with the audio clips of them laughing about how easily they could manipulate the corporate doormat. The explosion of public karma was instantaneous, brutal, and completely uncontrollable as the local community realized they had been weaponized to defend a gang of professional financial parasites. The narrative flipped into pure scorn within less than 3 hours, the very neighbors who had attacked me turning their fury directly onto Vanessa's doorstep. Dozens of comments began stacking up hour by hour, branding my sister and mother as disgusting, fraudulent thieves who had preyed on the love of a hard-working woman. But the final, lethal blow came from Gregory himself, who refused to spend another single hour tied to the moral decay of the Callahan household. Backed by my corporate estate attorneys, Gregory filed for an immediate, permanent asset divorce, freezing all joint marital lines and withdrawing his financial name from Vanessa's accounts. Because the master lease of the suburban house required his active employment credentials to remain valid, Gregory officially delivered a formal, non-negotiable eviction notice to Vanessa and my parents. They were given exactly 14 days to clear their boxes out of the property, left completely bankrupt, socially ruined, and entirely exposed to the unyielding forces of the real world. The total, satisfying downfall of the parasitic household descended upon them over the subsequent months with the unstoppable precision of a mathematical law. Without my capital quietly subsidizing their laziness, the reality of their massive debts crashed into their existence like a physical sledgehammer. My mother was forced to liquidate her expensive designer wardrobe and jewelry lines at a fraction of their value just to cover their immediate moving costs. They downsized from their comfortable suburban paradise into a cramped, run-down two-bedroom apartment located on the industrial edge of the city, where the trains shook the thin walls at all hours of the night. Vanessa's unearned high society status vanished overnight, her local real estate contacts completely blacklisting her from their networks due to the immense public scandal of the fraud reveal. She was forced to secure a low-wage retail position behind a grocery counter, her manicured fingers now stained with the manual labor she had spent a lifetime treating with absolute disdain. The pacing of my life slowed down beautifully over the next 2 years, allowing the white-hot trauma of my youth to transition into a flawless current of pure emotional recovery and deep personal triumph. I moved forward completely detached from their malice, relocating my primary logistics consultation networks to a stunning, sun-filled historic brownstone in a peaceful new city. My new sanctuary featured massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that looked out over a quiet courtyard filled with ancient oak trees and fresh, wild lavender. The rooms were filled with the soft, comforting aroma of fresh espresso, beautiful literature, and the absolute safety of a home where no entitlement could ever breach the walls. Within that peaceful environment, I built a real, authentic relationship with a supportive partner named Julian, a senior maritime compliance attorney who celebrated my brilliant mind and fiercely respected my boundaries. Julian was a man of immense intellect and genuine warmth, a partner who never looked at my success as a collective family resource to be plundered for his comfort. The final, emotionally resonant closure of my past arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon when my legal intermediary forwarded a long-distance voicemail from my father. I sat on the plush velvet sofa of my living room, Julian's hand gently sliding into mine as I pressed play on the audio file, letting his voice echo through the quiet space. "Hazel, it's your dad," he said softly, his voice sounding incredibly small, broken, and completely stripped of the arrogant, dismissive authority he used to project at our dinner table. "I am sitting alone in this tiny kitchen tonight, and I just watched Maisie ride that lavender bicycle you bought her around the parking lot of our complex. I am so deeply sorry, Hazel, for every single hour of the 6 years we spent letting your mother and sister treat your life like an invisible doormat. Since the business collapsed and I've had to work these 10-hour night shifts loading cargo boxes on the concrete warehouse floors, my body aches every single day. I finally understand the hell you walked through to keep a roof over our heads, and instead of protecting you like a father should, I laughed while they stole your future. You didn't ruin this family, Hazel. Our own superficial greed is what destroyed us, and I want you to know that I don't expect you to ever come back to this table. I just needed to tell you the truth before I grow too old to face it." I listened to his words with an entirely level heart rate, a soft, calm smile spreading across my lips as the final remnants of my childhood resentment vanished completely into the quiet afternoon. I didn't wire him financial rescue, and I didn't send a long paragraph trying to patch up the broken bridge, because true liberation means reaching a place where the apologies of the past can be accepted without restoring access to your future. "Thank you for the truth, Dad," I whispered into the quiet room, deleting the file from my system with a single, gentle tap of my finger that left the grid completely clean. The house of cards they had built on a foundation of unearned privilege and psychological warfare had completely dissolved into pure ash, leaving behind the clean, unbreakable reality of my own self-worth. If you are listening to this story right now, and you're the child whose silence and hard work have been systematically weaponized by the people who share your last name, hear me clearly. Your value is not defined by the absolute blindness or the predatory greed of a toxic household dynamic that refuses to see your worth. Strength does not mean enduring financial theft, emotional neglect, or public humiliation for the sake of a fake family peace that only serves the thieves in your life. True power is born the exact moment you stop begging for the validation of people who trade love for currency, and you begin to use your own brilliant mind to establish unbreakable walls around your future. My victory was a beautiful achievement, a complete deployment of legal strategy that permanently shielded my hard work from the hands of parasites. But the true victory, the one that allowed me to look into the mirror every single morning with a peaceful, confident smile, was the absolute freedom of knowing that I am more than enough. Home is not a geographic structure defined by a shared surname, a genetic code, or the toxic obligation to sacrifice your youth for people who treat your existence like a convenience. Home is where your boundaries are treated as absolute, where your hard work is genuinely honored, and above all else, home is where you are respected.